Hey everyone, my name is Drew Morrison, Policy Advisor for Planning and Project Development at the Maryland Department of Transportation. Really glad that you're able to join us tonight to talk about this important project. We're going to give it a couple of moments for people to finish up their dinner and hop on, and we'll look forward to diving into this with you tonight. Good evening again, everyone. We'll be getting started in just a moment, giving some folks time to hop on. Look forward to talking about the Tactical Bus Lane project with you. Alrighty, it's about 2 after, so in the interest of everybody's evening, we'll start to dive in. As I mentioned, I'm Drew Morrison, Policy Advisor for Planning and Project Development at the Maryland Department of Transportation. In my role, I help support our overall metro portfolio, as well as our project portfolio throughout the state. And we're really excited to partner with WMATA and the Montgomery County Department of Transportation to talk to you about the Georgia Avenue Tactical Bus Lane Demonstration Project tonight. As we get going, a little bit of housekeeping. This may be a new system for many of you used to Teams or Zoom, but a lot of the similar principles apply when you're on one of these webinars. All attendees are muted, but there are ways that you can engage with the meeting, of course. So to ask a question during the meeting, you can use the question mark tool to enter your question. And we'll be monitoring that, and we'll answer those questions when we come to the end of the presentation. And then also at the end of the meeting, we can take additional questions. You can use the raise hand button to be recognized, and we'll pull you off mute so that you can ask your question. And you can see in the image here, the question mark, the raise hand tool, and we look forward to engaging with you and hearing your comments and questions through the meeting. So with that, I'll pass over to Anna Quenze.
Great. Thanks, Drew. So for our safety moment today, I just want to highlight Metro's nighttime or courtesy stops initiative. It's something that we started recently because we wanted to make the ride safer for our customers at times when some of our stops are not well lit or easy to access. So if you're riding a bus between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m., you can request a courtesy stop from the bus operator. And if the driver deems that it's safe to do so, then they'll let you stop at a location that is to your liking. So somewhere that's more well lit, has better crossing or pedestrian facilities. And we want to make sure that this helps you on your ride to wherever you're headed at any time. For housekeeping, make sure that you type questions in the chat during the presentation. We'll do our best to respond to all the questions after the presentation is completed. And if you do want to keep up to date with us or have follow-up questions, you can send them to buspriority@wmata.com. Next slide. So good evening. My name is Annie Quenze Ogwe. I'm the project manager on Metro's Bus Priority team. We're here to discuss the Tactical Bus Lanes project, which proposes quick build bus-only lanes on Georgia Avenue between 16th Street and Lane Avenue. Metro operates a number of high ridership bus routes on this corridor with over 15,000 riders per day. These routes also provide access to jobs and opportunities in the greater Washington region by connecting the Silver Spring Transit Center on the Red Line. At tonight's public information meeting, we will discuss the project goals and objectives, project details, updates since our prior outreach, the schedule, and next steps. Importantly, the project is a partnership between Metro, Maryland State Highway Administration, and Montgomery County Department of Transportation. Our state and county partners on the project are Joe Mogus, Senior Safety Officer from M.SHA. Joe, if you want to just introduce yourself for a sec.
Good evening, everyone. As Andy Quincy said, my name is Joe Mogus, Senior Safety Officer for the State Highway Administration.
Thanks, Joe. And our partner from Montgomery County DOT is Mark Terry. He's Chief of Traffic Engineering Studies. Mark, do you want to say hi to the audience for a sec?
Sure. Good evening, folks. Good to see you, Mark Terry, Chief of Traffic Engineering Studies section. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks, Mark. You can go to the next slide. So buses have historically been among the most overlooked solutions for reducing congestion and mitigating climate change. In a lot of ways, they are the workhorse of our transportation system. So with that in mind, in 2020, Metro completed the Bus Transformation Project, which identified several strategies for prioritizing bus. These are all included within our Better Bus Initiative. And in addition to bus priority, the Better Bus Initiative also includes the bus network redesign, battery electric buses, and facilities modernization and improved amenities and customer information. Next slide. So the Tactical Bus Lanes project has three main goals and objectives. First, we want to improve Metrobus service on-time performance and reliability. We also want this project to accelerate implementation of bus rapid transit corridors in Montgomery County. And last but not least, the project will help build a stronger partnership between WMATA and our Maryland jurisdictions in providing frequent and reliable regional transit connections. Next slide. Since the summer of 2021, we have developed a really strong partnership with our colleagues at Montgomery County DOT and Maryland State Highway Administration. Our initial work involved looking at numerous bus corridors in the county to identify congested areas that would benefit from bus lanes and other bus priority treatments. The Georgia Avenue corridor rose to the top as the first corridor among many others being studied by the county. Go to the next slide. So here I'll hand it over to Mark Terry to describe how this project complements some of the other broader BRT and bus priority plans that Montgomery County has.
Hey, thank you, Anna Quincy. And once again, good evening to all of you, and thank you for coming out to find out about this important project. MCDOT is excited to partner with MATA and M.SHA in this project to provide tactical bus lanes along Maryland 97 Georgia Avenue between 16th Street and Wayne. Although this project will be coming out in a few years, in the interim and actually going on at this time, MCDOT is working in partnership with M.SHA and is in the process of implementing bus lanes along US 193 University Boulevard between Dennis Avenue and Amherst Avenue at this time. If you've been along that corridor, you might have seen some red bus lanes. If Mother Nature continues to cooperate, we anticipate completion in early December. Something else that's in the works is this will be sometime next summer. MCDOT will also be implementing bus lanes at the Wheaton Transit Center along Beers Mill Road between Maryland 193 and 97. Other services, bus services that are consistent with the master plan. Montgomery County presently has a flash bus along US 29. Either in planning or in design, we also have plans for bus rapid transit along Maryland 355, US 29, Maryland 650, and Maryland 586, as well as Randolph Road. All of that if you need additional information, you can find on the Montgomery County website. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ann Quincy.
Great, thanks, Mark. And I also want to highlight that yesterday there was a Ride on Reimagined meeting where the plan also included a flash service on George Avenue from Silver Spring to Calverton. So we're really looking forward to having more dedicated bus lanes for the future plans for bus service in the county and with Metrobus as well. All right, next slide. So why do we need bus lanes on George Avenue? Well, enforced dedicated bus lanes improve performance and can save up to 30% of travel time in the bus lane segment. The bus lanes being designed on George Avenue are also quick build bus lanes that only use red paint and signs. The biggest advantage of quick build lanes is that they can be implemented quickly without major disruptions to traffic or other items on the roadway. This project also supports the region's sustainability goals and Montgomery County's climate action plan. You can go to the next slide. So another thing that we wanted to highlight today is that slow buses discourage use, and the speed limit on George Avenue, as many people know, is 35 miles per hour, but in comparison, bus speeds hover somewhere around the 10-mile-per-hour range. And with that, slow buses hurt the folks who rely on it the most, people who need to get around to work, to school, medical appointments, and other everyday activities. And often these customers are people of color and folks who identify as belonging to low-income households. So it's really important that we emphasize projects like this to improve their transit service and equity around the region. Go to the next slide. So here I'll pass it back to Drew, and he's going to present an interactive poll for you to provide some feedback on how Metro, MDOT, and Montgomery County DOT can make the project successful.
Thanks so much, Iniquenze. So I will launch the poll now. We'd love for folks to be, responding here, taking a look at these different elements. What is most important to you when you think about what will make this project successful. And you want to give us maybe your top 3 options. There are multiple choice options that you can take. And so looking forward to your perspective and thoughts. As you're working through the different options that we flagged here, making sure that buses are on time more often, they arrive more frequently, that the lanes themselves are enforced, that all users know about these lanes, whether that's drivers, pedestrians, bicyclists, of course, the operators of the buses themselves, and outreach to businesses and delivery companies along the corridor who may be using the curb lane for parking, for pickup and drop off activity for those critical deliveries. We'll just give it another moment here on the poll. It looks like most people have had an opportunity to respond. So we'll just close the poll in just a moment here. So if you have a preference, plug it in. I will give 15 more seconds on the poll here. All right, and it looks like we did pick your top choice tonight, so we'll use that to see where people's biggest preferences were. All right, so we've come to 2 minutes. And looking at the results, a good spread across the different choices. But the number one with the plurality, about 1/3 of folks were looking for bus lanes that are enforced. And then beyond that, buses that arrive more frequently and buses that are on time more often. And then closing out with educating road users, getting about 20% of responses. So we really appreciate people diving into that, and we'll talk more about how this project can facilitate some of those outcomes. So with that, I'll pass it back to Anna Quenze to dive into this a little bit more.
Great, thanks, Drew. So this map that you see on the screen lays out the project for the Georgia Avenue tactical bus lanes. They're approximately 1 mile long from 16th Street on the north end to Wayne Avenue on the south end. I also want to highlight that this project is more than just the bus lanes. There are also queue jumps that I'll share in a later slide that provide benefits to our buses in congested locations. You can go to the next slide. So the hours that the bus lanes will operate in, the buses will operate in the bus lanes are from 6:30 to 9:30 a.m. and 3:30 to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, and in both directions, southbound and northbound. I do want to highlight that parking and loading is allowed at all other times outside of these hours. So we made that determination based on consultation with businesses and Montgomery County to make sure we had the right balance of all the different needs on this roadway. You can go to the next slide. As I mentioned before, this project is more than just bus lanes. We do have 2 queue jumps. One of them is at Georgia Avenue and International Drive. It's a northbound queue jump. And the other queue jump is at Georgia Avenue and Cameron Street. It functions northbound and southbound. So for those who are not familiar, a queue jump is a bus priority treatment where, if you're looking at this graphic from the National Association of City Transportation Officials, or NACTO, it basically describes how a queue jump will work. And if you're following that green path in the graphic, it's basically the path that a bus would take to use a queue jump. So it moves out of traffic to service customers at this bus stop at the corner, or the right turn lane in this case, and then it gets a 3 to 5 second head start at the intersection ahead of vehicles adjacent to it. So this type of treatment does help buses move through the corridor and at other locations, particularly when the bus lanes are being occupied by vehicles for parking and delivery needs and outside of the peak hours. In addition, at International Drive, this functions similarly, but it will be functioning at all times during the day. And we just wanted to provide these type of amenities and treatments because we know that they do help support the cumulative benefit of bus lanes on this project. Next slide. So I also want to highlight some updates since our prior outreach. And we have some design updates here that I'll get through. So one of the things that we have been doing a lot of is coordinating with MDOT-SHA and the county. And the state has a project called the Maryland 97 Montgomery Hills Safety and Accessibility Project. So in order to make the transition between the bus lanes that end at 16th Street and the Montgomery Hills project, we decided to adjust the limit of the bus lanes. So they start at the second leg of 16th Street to make it easier for vehicles to transition into this new feature. Now the timeline for that project is a little bit later than this project, so the bus lanes will likely be installed a couple of years before the Montgomery Hills project, but we want to make sure that we're working seamlessly between our different agencies on various projects in this corridor. Another update I have here is the Georgia Avenue bus lane, the southbound segment. It now ends at Fiddler Lane instead of at Ellsworth. And the reason that we did that was to also facilitate better movement between buses and vehicles based on our traffic analysis. And I do want to highlight that we understand there's a little bit of construction fatigue from the community. There's so many different projects that are happening on the Georgia Avenue corridor, as well as the broader Silver Spring and downtown area. So we're cognizant of that, and that's why we've been coordinating a lot with all the different partners who have different projects on this corridor. So we've been working with the 8787 Georgia development that's coming along, and we've made sure that this project is actually ending, or this bus lanes project is actually beginning after that project ends. So it'll help with a lot of the different construction activities that are happening. But we're going to continue to be engage with M.SHA and the county to make sure that if other projects pop up, that we're in sync and coordinating the design and construction activities. You can go to the next slide. So another update since we met last time is that we've done some more engagement with businesses and with other institutions on the roadway about the bus lane hours of operation. So this past summer in July, we conducted a door-to-door engagement with businesses. So your bigger chain stores as well as your smaller mom and pop small businesses. We went up and down Spring Street, or up and down Georgia Avenue from Spring Street to Wayne Avenue on both sides of the roadway, just to make sure that we shared information about the project with business owners and other institutions, as well as getting their general feedback on what their parking and loading activities were. So during that discussion and during that engagement, we had Carson Henry from the Silver Spring Urban District and our partners at Montgomery County DOT join us. Gary Ehrenrich was there with us. And it was really helpful to have them have that community perspective of what's happening locally and engaging with the businesses. So after we did that outreach, we met with the Silver Spring Chamber of Commerce and provided some feedback of what we heard. And that informed a lot of the work that we've done since then. You can go to the next slide. So some of the key takeaways from the businesses that we engaged in this past summer was that in general, the bus lane hours that we proposed don't really have a significant impact to their business operations. So having bus lanes in peak period in both directions didn't have, from their estimation, a big impact on their business operations. Some of the things that we also heard was that delivery trucks park along the corridor, but it's typically in off-peak hours. So a lot of deliveries happen between the 9:30 to actually 3:30 period of time, because a lot of the delivery companies don't want to be out here in rush hour. They want to make sure they get their deliveries done during the midday period. So that actually aligned well with the hours that we've selected. We also noticed that residents and patrons at medical offices generally park in parking garages that are off-street. So they're not often using the curbside lanes for parking because they want to use the garage. It's actually a little bit cheaper to park in the garage than on the curbside lane. So that's something that we heard from them as well. And then we also learned that some of the deliveries that I mentioned earlier happen in the off-peak periods, but if there are deliveries that happen during the peak period, there are other options for those deliveries to happen. So in some cases, some businesses use alleys for receiving their shipments, and others have different options. Another thing that we've heard from our engagement was that businesses were concerned about the lack of enforcement of on-street parking now. So that's something that we're going to take back and coordinate with the county and the state on when it comes to enforcement of the bus lanes. And then we'd also noted that there are a couple different banks on this corridor, and a lot of times people want to get their cash from the ATM quickly, so they'll park in the curbside lane, sometimes illegally, and get to the ATMs. But in general, this feedback did help us with our planning and design for this project, and we feel that it was really important to engage businesses and other members of the community. So we'll continue to make a point to do that as we move forward. You can go to the next slide. So here I'll pass it off to Drew, and he will give a quick update on the implementation and next steps.
Thanks, Iniquenze. So as we've mentioned throughout this meeting, this is a partnership with Metro, with the Maryland Department of Transportation, particularly our State Highway Administration, and then Montgomery County DOT, and for our project at Silver Hill Lane in Prince George is with our partners at the County Department of Public Works and Transportation there. So we're working collaboratively on an implementation framework. This is a new thing for us to be bringing that red paint to roads in Montgomery County, in Prince George's County. So we're working through all of the different pieces of how we fund this, how we operate it, how we maintain it. We are committed at the Maryland State Highway Administration to generally administer the implementation of the project, oversee that construction, oversee the ongoing maintenance activities in coordination with Metro and the counties. So we do want to take that role to help move this project forward. And we're working through the implementation strategy of each party's responsibilities and needs in the months ahead. And one major challenge there is in a time of very constrained resources in the state of Maryland. You may have read about the fiscal challenges that Metro is facing, that the Maryland Department of Transportation is facing in our capital program. So we're all working together to try to solve that funding challenge. But as we're trying to advance the design, advance the implementation approach, and align, on a strategy for tactical bus lanes here on Georgia Avenue. And so subject to identifying that funding, we are trying to look now towards a fiscal year 2025 implementation. For those who don't know, that's from July 2024 to June 2025, fiscal year 2025. And so basically we would have some pieces that we need to bring together to bring this project to a place where we could go out to the contractor community through a procurement process. And from that time, it would take about 6 months from going out on the street to find a contractor to awarding that, and then having that happen, during the paving season where we're able to get out and make improvements to Georgia Avenue. So this is a sense of what our timeline would look like. And then after, the paint is on the street, it's really important to monitor and evaluate, understand what's happening for buses and bus riders, understand what's happening to vehicular traffic, and seeing how this is performing holistically. So that would be an important piece of the puzzle as well. But as I mentioned, and will continue to mention, the funding is a gap at this point and something that we are working to figure out. And we, appreciate your engagement in this project as we look to the path ahead. So with that, we've come to the end of this evening's presentation, and we really appreciate questions that people have. And I know that there's been a number of questions that people have asked using the question tool, and we really appreciate that. So we'll open it up to that discussion point, and Macaulay Kelly here will help us dive into those questions.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and take the questions in the order in which they came in. But if you would like to ask a question live and come off mute, feel free to use the raise hand function, and we will get to those questions as well. Excuse me. So our first question is, what happens to the parking along Georgia Avenue below Spring Street?
So I can speak to that. The parking south of Spring Street will be available for drivers outside of the peak hours. So if you go to the next slide, Drew. Yeah, the hours of operation essentially mean that during these times, 6:30 to 9:30 a.m. and 3:30 to 7 p.m., vehicles will not be allowed to park in the curbside lane where the bus lanes are proposed. But outside of those hours, parking and loading is permitted.
So I think that addresses another question that we had about the peak hours. And we have another question also asking about cyclists being able to use the bus lane like they do in DC.
That's a good question. The design for the bus lanes allows bicyclists to ride in the bus lane. Any travel lane technically is permitted for bicyclist use, but in this project, we understood that the Georgia Avenue corridor is a high-speed corridor, and it's not one of the locations proposed for any separated bicycle infrastructure. So we did realize that there are adjacent parallel corridors that have bike infrastructure, or they are just lower speed and easier for the average person to use. So we do recommend that folks, if they are trying to bike, that they find some other parallel facilities that provide like a lower speed. So you're not as close to all the other vehicles on the roadway. So that's how we've handled that, but that's a great question. Thanks.
All right, we have another question. They really are excited about the Georgia Avenue, the bus lanes on Georgia Avenue between Wayne and 16th, but are wondering if additional bus lanes could be in the future to continue to Wheaton and beyond, which is also another congested area.
So I'll defer that question to MDOT partners because they're more familiar with other plans for projects like that.
Sure, and Joe, my colleague from State Highway, can help here as well. We are looking at Georgia Avenue in a holistic way related to a variety of different policy goals. So in some cases, directly, how do we look at dedicated bus lanes here to help move buses forward? Folks may be familiar, there's a project in the Montgomery Hills area looking at that corridor, and they're trying to balance the various challenges of course, high volumes of traffic, but also a need to provide connectivity, a need to provide, a space that provides more opportunities for pedestrians and all users. And that's working its way through the design and community engagement process. And then further north of Forest Glen Road, all the way to Lay Hill Road, the Maryland Department of Transportation with our partners at Metro just submitted a grant application request through what's called the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhood Access and Equity programs, where we're going to hopefully, if the federal government will provide us the resources, provide a planning study that looks holistically at that section of the corridor, and also thinks about the future of the area around the West Wheaton Metro Station in the Westfield Mall. So we are definitely thinking about the future of Georgia Avenue in different sections. We'll be balancing different focus areas, different requirements, a lot of focus on Vision Zero and safety in the corridor. But really here we've got the focus on the opportunity to move forward with some bus lanes in the near future. Joe, I don't know if there's anything you'd add to that.
That was a very thorough answer, Drew. I was going to say most of what you just said, so I'll just supplement your statement by saying that Aniquenze and WMATA is sharing plans for a tactical bus lane from downtown Silver Spring northerly up to 16th Street. As Drew said, we do have SHA, a forthcoming Montgomery Hills project, which will incorporate multimodal improvements, not transit, but bicycles and pedestrians from 16th Street northerly to Forest Glen Road. In addition to that, there will be a two-way cycle track along 16th Street from Maryland 97 to 2nd Avenue, and there will be an expansion or an extension of that from 2nd Avenue all the way to Spring Street, and that will then connect to Montgomery County's bicycle network. So what we're trying to do is all different modalities are working together in cooperation and coordination to develop a real network of multimodal mobility. So you can walk, bike, or ride transit in and around downtown Silver Spring and northerly up to potentially the Glenmont Metro Station. And what Drew was mentioning about that grant study, the RCN, is essentially to take the concepts that we're describing today, which is the Montgomery Hills project and perhaps even transit improvements beyond the scope of the Montgomery Hills project, which terminates at Forest Glen, and expanding that northerly all the way up to the end of the red line. So we may not necessarily have plans for the expansion of the transit lanes north of 16th Street right now, but there are studies and analysis forthcoming and ongoing to that effect. So thank you.
Okay. Moving on to our next question. Folks are wondering about the timeline and how it's been extended out. Wanting to know, is that a function of engineering or identifying funding and securing that funding?
I'll be happy to take that. That is primarily about funding. There are also some process components as State Highway Administration looks to take over that administration role. But predominantly the challenge, we have strong interest from all of the parties in implementing this. The county, from Metro, from the Maryland Department of Transportation. We see this as providing a benefit to Metrobus users along the corridor. And I think really having that equity focus and about how we think about the future of our roads. But it is a moment we're in where dollars are very tight throughout our entire program. And that's something we've communicated throughout the state and will continue to communicate as we approach our final capital budget on January 17th. So we're definitely a situation where we encourage people who are interested in these and other improvements, to engage with the department, engage with their elected officials, and we'll continue to look to see what we can do. But the challenges of timing are definitely related to what it will take to find resources to advance. There are some things we have to do from a process standpoint and from a procurement standpoint, but definitely the resources will be the major driver for implementation moving forward.
Great, thank you. And this might be a question for Mark. How will dedicated bus lanes be enforced? That they're making the point that this is a critical part of the project, and it's pretty disappointing when they see other dedicated bus lanes, bike lanes not enforced.
Well, that's really good. That is a really great question. And what we this is aside from the Georgia Avenue dedicated bus lanes. So what we have planned for the bus lanes along University Boulevard is we are going to place cameras at certain locations to see what sort of level of vehicles that are parking are violating the bus lane, and then we're going to share that information with law enforcement and see what next steps we take. But that's a great question.
And just to hop on with from Mark's response, for the Georgia Avenue bus lanes project, we are working with the county and state on enforcement aspects. So currently we are looking towards law enforcement potentially, or the parking division help with enforcement, but we understand that humans doing enforcement isn't always the best way to go, and that Metro does have a clear lanes or automated camera enforcement program that's starting up in the district really soon. So we hope to work with our partners at Maryland Department of Transportation and county to put forward legislation or support legislation, I should say, that would allow that type of automated enforcement in Montgomery County as well. So stay tuned, but we're looking forward to that.
Great, thank you. And I think you touched on this, but I'll ask the person who asked the question if we have not already answered about how the bike lanes interact. I'm sorry, how do bus lanes interact with cyclists on the street?
So buses are buses that are operated on this corridor and any corridor in the region are operated by professional drivers. So Metrobus operators are professional drivers who, in their guidelines, when functioning with bicyclists, they are required to pass the bicyclists and give 3 feet of space. So similar to what a vehicle would have to do. Our bus operators are actually probably better trained than the average motorist, so they are really keen and observant to who's on the roadway and making sure that they provide enough space, because they obviously want to keep everyone, all the passengers on the bus safe, but also all the other road users on the road safe as well. So they are instructed to pass the bicyclists by giving 3 feet of space. And if that requires them to go out of the bus lane and into the adjacent travel lane, then they will do so. All
right, thanks. Our next question is, how How will the bus lanes impact the current backups of automobile traffic on northbound Georgia Avenue during the evening rush hour? Specifically with backups extending further south from the light at 16th Street than they do now, and will they further increase the cut-through traffic into the Woodside Park neighborhood between Spring Street and Montgomery Hills?
So that's another great question. In the planning and design process for this project, we did conduct a traffic analysis with our engineering consultant, and we also had review of that analysis by our partners at MDOT-SHA and Montgomery County DOT. So some of the things that we observed in the build condition, or the condition where bus lanes would be active, is that we identified locations where adjustments to signal timing would need to be made at the various signals on the corridor, so that we could ensure that there weren't more or adverse disruptions to traffic in the manner that you're describing in your question. So just be aware that we did take that into account, and prior to the construction, MDOT-SHA and Montgomery County DOT will coordinate on those signal timing adjustments to make sure that when the lanes are completed, the signals are allowing that time for vehicles to get through.
Okay. The word tactical in our title, does that mean permanent, or under what circumstances would the bus lanes be removed?
So the tactical aspect of the project is more of an emphasis on the speed of which that it is designed and constructed. But I do understand where the question comes from, in that we did start off with this project as more of a demonstration in mind, but we have been, as we've been working towards the completion of the design phase, we've put in various elements of the project to ensure that if it is becoming permanent, that we've done all the things to make sure that it passes the sniff test, if you will. So that's where the tactical framing comes from. But just for your awareness, we do have a performance evaluation that will occur after the implementation, so that we can have a study period where we evaluate the changes that have been made and determine if there are any adjustments that have to happen.
Why are the bus lanes being cut short at Fiddler rather than extending to Ellsworth? Would that not slow the buses down before they get to the station?
So that's another great question. In our traffic analysis, we determined that there would have been mitigation necessary for the southbound Colesville Road. If you're familiar with that intersection, there would have needed to be a double left turn instead of a single left turn. And that design change to the signal there was very complicated and challenging, because that's essentially that Colesville Road section is a reversible lane, and having to adjust it to allow for a double left turn was really complicated. So as an alternative, we considered what are the methods could be used to address the traffic concern and the mitigation in that location. So it was determined that if we ended the bus lane at Fiddler Lane instead of at Ellsworth, then that segment would still allow vehicles and buses to move through freely and not create more congestion than we would be necessary, or that would happen in that standpoint. So that's one of the reasons why it was adjusted to Fiddler Lane. But be aware that this project is in its first stage, and we potentially could consider some adjustments in the future. I just want to note that the District of Columbia is planning to extend their bus lanes up to Eastern Avenue. So there might be a need to connect the end of this project to that project in the future. And that might, after we do a performance evaluation, might determine that perhaps continuing the bus lanes further south may make sense. So stay tuned for that as well, but I agree that that is a good question.
Okay, and our next question, 15,779 bus riders on various routes each week translates to about 1,600 bus riders per rush hour. How many drivers use the lanes each rush hour? Has there been data collected on that?
So I don't have that data directly in front of me right now, but I think I understand the question in that there are different users of the roadway, and we have to figure out ways to accommodate them. So ultimately, this is a heavily traveled roadway for drivers, and we understand that they have needs as well. But in doing this, we want to make sure that the bus lane does provide some benefit to our bus customers, bus riders, in a complementary way to drivers. So we're trying to make sure that we balance the needs of both types of users in this project.
Okay. They'd like to know if surveys have been conducted to assess how many people who currently drive on Georgia Avenue might switch to using a bus rather than driving.
So that assessment hasn't occurred in this project, but I understand the point of a mode shift or figuring out like how many people would potentially move from driving to using the bus as a result of this project. So that is something that we can look into during our performance analysis. We could potentially assess the number of users who switch from driving to buses, but that is a very difficult assessment to make. And it's sometimes hard to sift out the causation versus correlation sometimes, but we will be looking at the volume of vehicles and buses and ridership on our buses during the performance evaluation phase.
All right.
And Equenze, just to add there, I think what we know from the research around mode shift is getting people out of signal occupancy vehicles and into transit or other modes is the ability to provide something that's reliable, that's on time, that's speedy, is the fundamental variable that people are looking for, and why we're looking to advance projects like this. Maryland Department of Transportation has adopted pretty substantial goals to reduce vehicle miles traveled. That is, how much are we all driving around throughout the state? And so we are definitely looking and know that the way to do that is to make sure the alternatives are stronger. And so, as Anna Quenze said, monitoring to see how this performs is really essential. But it is definitely something where we'll be looking to see where are ways throughout our system that we can make transit more reliable and more effective and encourage more people to hop on. So definitely something we want to see how it's performing. Rock, I see you came off if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, I just wanted to add also. So this is one project. It's one small segment of a project, but as the county builds more of its BRT corridors and adds more dedicated lanes for it, I think it's creating a system of reliable transit that also encourages that mode shift. And so this is just one small project, and I don't think all the people who drive on that corridor are immediately going to transfer to bus, because it also has to tie into the origin destination, has to work well with their lifestyles. But over time, as we start building and adding these systems of more bus lanes, more reliable transit, we hope to see a good mode shift, which is, where our climate change goals are.
All right. Thank you. To that end, has there been a study done in our analysis that on how dedicated bus lanes would affect people who use Georgia Avenue to commute by car?
So we have done a traffic analysis comparing the existing condition of what we have today to what we will have in the future with bus lanes. And like I mentioned earlier, we did determine that there's some signal timing changes that would have to take place prior to construction to make sure that there are negligible or not really impactful changes for people who drive on the corridor. So we have done that analysis.
Okay. Next question is, will the project go through the park and planning mandatory referral process?
So from my work on this project, we have not had to go through that process, mainly because the scope of the project is very limited. It's mainly red paint and signage. It's not something that is increasing width of travel lanes or having any like environmental impacts. So that's why it's not necessary for it to go through that process.
Okay.
And Gwen's dad, and I see it's Eli who asked the question. We did in my previous life engaged with Dave Ansbacher around the mandatory referral question for the Great Seneca Transit Network, another situation where there Montgomery County was looking to provide some red paint in existing right of way. So in that case also, there wasn't a mandatory referral step. So as we're trying to move these projects forward, we're able to do that without mandatory referral. But we will continue to engage with Montgomery Planning and other stakeholders on these projects.
Great, thank you. Let's see, are the traffic analysis public, and if so, where can they be found?
So the traffic analysis is part of the project documentation for this effort. They are not public documents at the moment, but if you have questions about like certain intersections or questions related to the traffic analysis, we'll try to work with you and answer your questions directly if you have any. So, and maybe I'll shift to MDOT if they have any other feedback on that.
All right. We've got 2 questions left, so let's, and we're running short on time, so let's see if we can't get through those. Is there a cost estimate for the project right now? SHA cited costs as a reason to push this back. However, they cite that the issue is that this is a cheap way to get buses to run more efficiently.
So I'll speak to the cost aspect. The construction cost for the Georgia Avenue portion of the project is about, the last time we did the estimate was $2.25 million. There's another segment of this project on Maryland 458 or Silver Hill Road that is around the same rough cost. So in total, building those 2 parts of this project will be about $5 million total. But I'll defer to Drew to speak to the kind of broader question about funding and costs.
Yes, and certainly understand the question, and I will clarify that it is not that this project is, some inordinately costly effort, and we appreciate the opportunity to try to implement these in a low cost effective way, and we're excited about this. It really goes to some of the larger structural challenges that each of the agencies is facing. And from MDOT's perspective, we have a $2.1 billion hole in state resources in our 6-year capital program. And what that means functionally is that all throughout the state, every new capital program is really waiting to see what the financial resource picture looks like. So whether it's this, whether it's something throughout the state, they're all sort of in this same wait and see moment right now. There have, of course, been announcements about major projects that are further off. But in terms of moving things, in the near term, in the next fiscal year, in the fiscal year after that, they're all facing this question of how do we address the pretty substantial fiscal challenge that comes from, major reduction in gas tax revenues and new vehicle titling revenues that have really created this strong structural deficit. So it is a situation where we're trying to raise awareness and information about this project and other initiatives that align with our goals, and be clear that throughout our portfolio, not just this, but all of the projects that MDOT, State Highway Administration, our Transit Administration are looking at are all sort of in this wait and see as we think through the fiscal situation. So it is something where we encourage people who are excited about this project to continue to engage, to tell stakeholders in elected office that they're excited about this project as we look through how we'll move forward in light of some strong fiscal challenges.
All right, and our last question is, when the traffic studies were complete, or when were the traffic studies completed? Were they during the pandemic when volume would have been lower? This particular attendee is concerned about traffic cutting through neighborhoods along the route.
So for that question, we did conduct traffic studies in 2022, so last year. So that's when our traffic analysis took place. However, the count data that we used was based on pre-pandemic volumes, and we also applied like a growth factor to those. So our traffic analysis was actually very conservative in that we probably overestimated traffic just to make sure that we would have some wiggle room or flexibility. So if traffic came back stronger, that we've looked at like the worst case scenario.
Okay, that is the last question we have, and we are at 7:26. I'll turn it back over to you, Drew.
Sure. Well, yeah, really appreciate everyone coming out virtually this evening to engage and appreciate the range of questions, whether that's about concerns about traffic and neighborhood impacts, whether that's concern about how do we move this forward more quickly and maximize the benefits for buses. We wanted to have this moment to share some information about the project. You can see here we have contact information and the website, and encourage you to reach out to the team should you have any questions, should you have, want to know more about the project and keep tabs as it moves ahead. We appreciate your continued engagement. As I mentioned, from the department's perspective, we hope to see more of these projects in Maryland so that we can continue to advance priority for transit. We'll have to continue to work on that budget challenge that I've mentioned throughout the night, but we'll continue to partner with Metro and with Montgomery County to advance work that can help make the bus more reliable for all users. And we really appreciate Metro's work on this and you coming out tonight to engage on this.